Thank you all for joining. My name is Nick Stallman. I'm the wildlife habitat educator for Audubon Society of Western Pennsylvania. And today we will be talking about spring invasive plant ID and kind of what that is, what they are, all that fun stuff. But the outline today is going to be a brief little overview of what exactly invasives are, why we should even care about this topic. And then we'll go through some ID tip for 10 common species and what you can look out for in spring to help you ID them, some of the confusion species to make sure you're not pulling out the wrong thing. And then we'll discuss some of the management options that you have if you're trying to get rid of those species on your property. Then at the very end, I'll go through some resources that you can reference to look into more on different species, as well as the species that we will cover. And like I said, at the very end, I will stick around for as many questions as you guys can have. What are invasive species, though? So I always like to put up this fun wall of text from the United States Geological Survey for the definition of an invasive species as an introduced non-native organism, whether that's a disease, a plant, or an animal that begins to spread or expand its range from the site of its original introduction that has the potential to cause harm to the environment, the economy, or to human health. So let's kind of just take this apart. The three big components of an invasive species is the fact that it's an introduced non-native species. So something that was originally from some other part of the world and then is now in this new area, but it also begins to spread or expand its range beyond that initial site. So this is something that comes in and now has spread from wherever it was first introduced, whether that's a garden or a hillside for a plant for erosion control or some sort of animal that was introduced for biocontrol. And then it has some potential to cause harm, whether that's to the economy or the environment or human health. In this, our focus today will definitely be on the environmental side of things and what these invasive species can do to kind of harm our conservation efforts. So some examples, and it's not just plants. I mean, that cause disease can also be invasive species like Pseudogymnascus destructans, which is the fungus that causes the fatal white nose syndrome in bats, or Cryphonectra parasitica, better known as chestnut blight. Main reason we don't have chestnuts on the landscape anymore. Invasive species can also be insects, like our good friend the spotted lanternfly, or hemlock woolly adelgid, which is causing mass die-offs of a very important habitat type with these hemlock groves near creeks. And other animals can also be invasive, like zebra mussels, which cause hundreds of millions of dollars of damages to infrastructure, as well as loss of revenue from recreation. The northern snakehead is a very aggressive and voracious predator that competes with native species and disrupts aquatic ecosystems. And the good old wild boar, which is just 200 pounds plus of heedless destruction, disrupting everything from agricultural fields to patches of endangered plants that they just root up. But today's program is going to be focused on plants and with the invasive plants that we kind of see around here. And the question of are invasive plants just weeds is usually a great question. Well, weeds, that's just a plant growing somewhere where you don't want it to. So yeah, invasive plants to me are also weeds, but someone who really likes burning bush, which is an invasive woody shrub, wouldn't really consider it a weed, but I would. So weed is very subjective. It's kind of from person to person on what defines that. And it's also kind of interesting because we have to always think about the fact that this is a plant that is non-native and has been introduced. So in this photo, we have miscanthus grass or silvergrass, which is very invasive here in Southwest PA, and Canada goldenrod, which is an awesome native pollinator plant. However, this photo was taken in Japan, where silvergrass is native and belongs, and Canada goldenrod is invasive and spreads and outcompetes with everything. So invasives are kind of different than weeds, but they could be weeds. Weeds are, it's not an official term. It's just a plant growing somewhere where you don't want it to grow. But why are invasive plants a concern? So we'll go through a little bit of some of the traits, like the fact that they usually have abundant seed production. So this is tree of heaven right here with these winged seeds, and we'll talk about tree of heaven in a little bit in further detail. Each tree that produces seeds can produce about 300,000 every year. And these are wind dispersed seeds that just blow out onto the landscape. And that's nothing compared to a more recent invader around here. I'm starting to see more and more Royal Paulownia, also known as Princess Tree. It's Paulownia tomentosa. Each one of these has multiple seed pods that have even tinier winged seeds than the tree of heaven. And this tree is capable of producing like 20 million seeds per tree per year. Alongside this abundant seed production, they also are, it's zoochory without local herbivory. Like, so all that means zoochory is animals disperse their seed. So a good old robin likes to eat the bush honeysuckle berry, and the seed survives through the digestive tract. Bird plants it somewhere new, usually along a fence row or a fence line or power line right away. And that's one great way this spreads, and that's how a lot of our native shrubs spread. However, a lot of our native shrubs also have deer and other herbivores and insects that defoliate them. A lot of these invasives are very unpalatable to deer or might even cause them harm if they were to ingest them. So our abundant white-tailed deer aren't going to help us with our invasive species because they just don't even acknowledge them as food. They're just going to completely ignore this bush honeysuckle while the birds continue to spread it. So that can be quite a problem. They also have something called allelopathy, and they're also generalists. So allelopathy is not present in all invasive plants, but it is going to be present in some like tree of heaven over here or garlic mustard over here. And this is where a chemical is actually released into the soil that suppresses the growth of surrounding plants. It gives the original species some sort of competitive advantage by either altering the soil chemistry to make it so that mycorrhizal associations, the fungal associations with plants, can't form, and that invasive species doesn't need it. So it's able to alter that soil chemistry, or there's just some sort of chemical that's making it so that the plant can't germinate. So this combined with the fact that they're generalists, meaning that they're fine growing wherever their seed lands, wherever the seed germinates, they're going to establish. A lot of our invasive plants are generalists, and they're also pioneer plants, which means that they favor sites of disturbances and they are going to be able to survive and thrive in areas of construction and renovations in urban areas. So onwards, we add all these traits together, we're going to start to see that there's just general increased competition from invasive plants that are directly competing with resources like sunlight, moisture, nutrients, and space. They can easily overwhelm. So we've got stilt grass over here that has died back. It's an annual grass. There's seeds that are in the soil right now that are going to regrow. But in the meantime, the stilt grass has created this massive blanket of dead foliage that can make it so that things like our spring wildflowers will not appear. They cannot get the sunlight to come through this massive blanket. We also actually see more increased soil erosion. So a lot of these invasive plants were brought over for erosion control because they're quick growing plants that love disturbance, but they tend to form monocultures, meaning it's the only plant on that area. And if it's the only plant, the roots aren't going to create as intricate of a system of weaving together to keep the soil in place. So in fact, a lot of the plants that were brought over for erosion control, we have more erosion, more soil erosion in those areas. Knotweed's a good example. In fact, knotweed, we see whole stream bank collapses with that, which is going to degrade the water column. quality. Soil erosion is going to increase the silt in the water, and that's never going to be a good thing. But there's also just aquatic invasive plants like curly leaf pondweed, which has massive diebacks in the summertime, and this results in low oxygen in the water system itself from the decomposition of all that plant material. And we actually will get harmful algae blooms from this. So these plants can cause some serious issues to the aquatic ecosystems, but also just wildlife habitat in general, whether it's on the land or in the water. Wildlife needs food, water, shelter, and space. Invasives can impact every single one of these. The food that invasive plants provide tend to be of lower quality than the native counterparts. So bush honeysuckle is one where it's got abundant berries and birds love to eat them. However, they might as well just be potato chips on this bush. They are not getting the proper nutrients that they need to survive. They do not get the proper nutrients to molt and regrow feathers with appropriate color. So, if this is the only food on the landscape, you actually do see some declines in bird populations. And the monocultures of just having the same shrub over and over again in the same area, that decreases the habitat complexity, which means that there's less horizontal and vertical diversity in the area. And we're going to have less niches for wildlife to fill if it's just the same thing over and over again. And some of these plants are not conducive to proper nesting, and they're a lot easier for nest predators to access the eggs inside. This all kind of just leads to decreased biodiversity for the area. Another thing to kind of consider is that all our native plants, they're they evolve together with our insects. So a lot of the plants that we have in our area have some sort of insect association, whether it's something as crucial as being the host plant in the case of caterpillars. Some caterpillars need a specific species of plant or genus of plant to survive. Um, Monarchs and milkweed is the famous example. These invasive plants have those associations in their native territory, but they don't have those associations here. So if all that we have in an area are invasive plants, we're going to see less biodiversity, especially when it comes to the insects. The birds might eat the flowers, or sorry, the birds might eat the berries, and bees might visit the flowers for nectar. We don't have all these important interactions coming from the insects that require the foliage to as part of their diet or that burrow into the wood of the plant. And there's been a lot of studies that show that there's just an overall decrease in the amount of species that we see in an area that is overpopulated with invasive species. And there's also just a lot of economic loss from this. Global estimates are in the trillions of dollars over the last 50 years. And this is from things like impacts to agriculture, water treatment facility issues. This is more for every invasive species, not just plants. But there's also job losses from reduced forestry production, damages to infrastructure, management costs for these, especially in areas like sports and commercial fishing and hunting areas. So again, invasive species are concerned because they have abundant seed production. Their seeds are spread readily by wildlife, especially birds, without many herbivores eating the plants themselves. And they tend to be generalists, able to grow anywhere, and some of them have allelopathy, which prevents other plants from growing nearby. This all leads to increased competition with plants, soil erosion, degradation of water quality, degradation of wildlife habitat, decreased biodiversity, and even economic losses. So that is a nice overview of invasive plants and invasive species in general. So we are going to get into the meat of this with some common invasive plants of Southwest Pennsylvania. And up first, we are going to hit the big one, tree of heaven. So this is a rapidly growing deciduous tree. This is native to China. It was actually first introduced in the US in Philadelphia in the late 1700s. And this was initially valued for the fact that it's got a unique, fast growing shade tree. It's able to withstand most conditions, whether they're poor urban soils or rich soils out in the meadow. This is a tall tree, so sometimes folks think of this as a small shrub because that's what you see. But if you start to look for the traits of identifying its bark, you're going to see that this is a tree that easily reaches 80 feet in height. The diameter can be over 4 feet. So this can be a very, very large tree. And it is dioecious, which means there's a male and a female species individual, and it's the female that will make the wind-blown seeds called samaras. Whether it's a male or a female, though, it can still spread through cloning by forming these root suckers, root shoots, and you will have a grove of all the same sex of tree. It can easily make dense colonies. And again, this is the tree that it's a prolific seeder. So we have 300,000 seeds on a female tree each year. So some ways to identify this in the springtime, if you think you have it, turn over a leaf. So I'll show some leaves up close here in a second, some of the confusion species, but Tree of Heaven has a smooth margin on the leaflet. So there's no teeth right here, except for right at the base. There's these very large teeth that have these glands. They're like little pimples on the underside of the leaf. If you go to crush this as you're touching it, so you crush the leaflet, you crush the twig, it's gonna smell bad. It smells like rancid peanut butter, and it's just not pleasant. So ways you can confuse this with, or species that you can confuse this with, are going to be black walnut and staghorn sumac. All three of these species that are shown have pinnately compound leaves. That means that this entire structure is the leaf, and it's composed of leaflets. These leaflets are arranged in a pinnate manner or feather-like manner. So these three species could get confused with each other. The big thing is Tree of Heaven. The margin of those leaflets are smooth, except for the big teeth at the very bottom or base of the leaflet. Black walnut and staghorn sumac, and all the sumacs are going to have toothed margins, so they're serrated. Also, black walnut, if you crush the leaf, has that really pleasant, or at least I think it's pleasant. It's kind of a citrusy smell. And staghorn sumac won't have any smell to it. Staghorn sumac also, the twigs are going to be covered in fine hairs, so that's a useful trait to look for. But black walnut and tree of heaven and staghorn sumac can kind of all grow in the same place. Staghorn sumac is a great alternative for tree of heaven. It's going to be just as adaptable into soil conditions. It's great on hillsides. So if you've got a tree of heaven, you might be trying to think of what can you do. Well, don't just go out and pull it. That is just going to make it angry. This is not a recommended thing unless it's a very small tree. I'm talking like a little 6-inch sapling that you can ensure you get every little bit of it. Otherwise, cutting it is also not advised. This is going to send up root suckers, and some of these root suckers will be as far as 50 feet from the parent tree. So just a cut or injured tree may send up dozens of root sprouts, or even if it's the stump itself, it'll send up a dozen on the stump. Tree of Heaven is really one of those that you should use herbicide to remove if that's your goal. And I will share resources that you can look at to find the appropriate herbicides to use and the timing, because timing is very, very crucial for Tree of Heaven. This is something that needs to kind of happen mid to late summer, and we have to target those roots. There's ways to do this through something called hack and squirt, where you actually are going to take a hatchet, you hack into the live tissue of the tree, and you squirt a little bit of herbicide into the tree in that mid to late summer time when it's taking stuff down to the roots. So it'll take that herbicide down to the roots. It's all kind of contained in the tree itself. And hopefully just with one, but possibly you'll see this is repeated, possibly another follow-up treatment. This is one that I highly recommend if you're going to go after trying to treat Tree of Heaven. you're going to want to consult these resources that I share at the end. Penn State Extension and the Pennsylvania DCNR are going to be the best resources. And privet. We're on to our next one. So privet is actually about four different species here in PA. They're all essentially the same when it comes to what they can do, what they're capable of, and management. So four similar species, very difficult to differentiate. So don't worry about trying to figure out the species, but they all have these simple leaves that are usually evergreen unless we have a very bad winter. So further south, they're definitely fully evergreen, but they're a little dark, leathery, and they're oppositely arranged. So we have at each occurrence of a leaf, there are two that are happening. So one here and one here. So at each node, we have two leaves. And they're gonna range in size from anywhere from like an inch to even 3 inches in length. But I'd say on average, it's about an inch and a half. Their flowers, you should start seeing these right about now. They're four-petaled, trumpet-shaped little guys, and they have form in clusters. These clusters will usually occur on the side or at the terminal part of the twig. And this is actually one of the ways you can tell some of the species is where are these flower clusters forming on the twig. The fruits are called drupes. They look like little purple berries. They're dark purple, blue, black, about a quarter inch or so. These are going to be forming late summer, so this isn't necessarily you're something you're gonna see in spring. However, they sometimes will persist. So we'll actually see these on the same shrub that's just getting its like the leaves pushing out. So this can be a very useful ID as well as the smooth bark. But as you're looking at the bark, you'll notice that it looks like it has some thorns to it. And these thorns are happening in what's known as a four-ranked growth. So you have one happening here, and then you go up, and it's happening here. So if you were to look down on this, it forms an X. And these aren't really thorns. They can be sharp, but it's actually the deciduous twig. So I'll show you what that means. So that was just a little bit of that's where an old twig was, and it loses it, and then you're left with this thorn-like structure. So this feature right here is very useful for ID. When again with a This is one that's fairly easy to identify and not confuse with a whole lot. That opposite leaf arrangement and the relatively small leaves is usually enough for a positive ID of this genus. But you can still check because we do have some native understory trees and shrubs that are opposite leaves. They're kind of small. Things like our flowering dogwood and our native viburnum shrubs both have opposite leaf arrangement, but their bark is going to be very rough and or patchy versus that smooth bark of privet. So for management, if it's a small plant, just go ahead and pull that thing out. Um, Larger plants, you can use these weed wrenches. If you've got some privet that you're trying to remove from your area, we do have some of these that we can loan out to members. So just reach out to me and I can put one aside for you. But this gives you the torque that you need to rip these tall, like tree size ones out. But you have to get all the roots. Anything left over, it is going to come back. If you have a big thicket of privet and you're just trying to figure out what to do, a lot of times people want to just mow it down. You could. It will resprout. Mowing is not going to make it go away, but mowing could help you get into that area, or a bush hog could help you get into that area to manage it a bit better. So think of it as it's letting you get in to kind of re-look at it. But honestly, mowing it and following up with some sort of appropriate herbicide treatment is going to be the most effective. However, this is a very persistent plant. It will grow back. This is going to take several attempts, and birds are going to bring it back. I almost guarantee it. The birds love those little droops. At some point, one of them is going to drop a seed back in your area. So you will see this. So don't drive yourself insane aiming for eradication. Just focus on those desirable areas. If you have one patch of privet that you really want to kind of focus on, go in there, rip it out, and start thinking about putting in some native plants like our red chokeberry, or maybe some of those native viburnums like black haw or possum haw. These are going to be great alternatives. So as you're going in there, start thinking about what you can put in its place. And don't think that you have to make all of these go away because I promise you, it's going to find its way back. So can we increase our native plant diversity while still having these invasives is a good mentality to have. All right, let me check the chat while we're going on here. So for black chokeberry versus privet, I would definitely look at that leaf arrangement. So chokeberry, you'll have that alternate leaf arrangement in the springtime. Meaning an alternate leaf, meaning that there's only one leaf at each of those nodes. All right, multiflora rose. This was another one that was introduced, so probably mid 1800s. This was a root stock for ornamental roses, and then later just used all over the place, whether it was for erosion control on hillsides or as a department approved wildlife shrub. So this was planted in wildlife management areas all over the eastern US and has since spread and persisted due in part to wildlife loving the little fruits called rose hips and spreading those seeds. But also, it's got a very attractive flower, which makes it so that a lot of folks don't want to get rid of it. They find a lot of value in this, makes it hard to convince them to remove it. However, this is the one that forms those dense monoculture thickets. It's just multifloral rows in those understories, and it hardly lets anything come up in its place. So this can quickly degrade those natural environments and decrease biodiversity. This is something, however, that if you don't have a plan to come in with replacing those shrubs, you're going to lose those shrub habitats. So that's something that we have to deal with all the time. If you come to Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve and you go along our gravel trail here, you're going to see that there's a lot of multifloral rose thickets. However, if we were just to go in, rip them all out right now, we'd probably see less spring migrant birds unless we could start introducing some native shrubs to take their place as we go about it. So it's not going to be an easy thing, but can we figure out ways to increase the diversity as we go about this? Because they're here and they're going to kind of persist for a long time. As far as identifying this guy, when it comes to roses, roses have compound leaves just like the tree of heaven that we looked at, but they at the base of the leaf. So this structure right here is called the petiole. So you can think of it as the stem of the leaf where it's connecting to the twig. And at the base of the petiole, you have a stipule. This is something that is present in the Rosa genus. So this is something you can always look for to identify roses. And the shape and structures on the stipule can help you identify species when the leaf is present. In multifloral rose, the stipule has these fringes. They look like little tentacles or really long plant-like hairs coming off of the stipule. That is diagnostic. That is what you're going to want to look for to compare it for if you might have one of our native roses growing in your forest or in your wetland. So Carolina rose, you're going to have this nice winged stipule that has no hair, like, well, no fringes coming off. It might have very fine hairs that you can notice with a hand lens, but otherwise it's just this nice little wing. And then swamp rose, another common native rose that you might encounter, it's almost as if you took the Carolina rose and folded it together like a taco and it stuck. So the swamp rose, it'll look just like the Carolinas, but it adheres to itself at one or multiple spots. These two shrubs are great replacements for multifloral rose. You get all the benefits of multifloral rose. You get the erosion control, you get the highly nutritious rose hips, you get some really beautiful flowers, you get some nice dense habitat thickets, but you also get tons of insect pollinator association. So you're going to get butterflies and all sorts of other beneficial insects that visit these and use these as part of their life cycle. And we have a good assortment of Carolina and swamp roses at our Audubon Center for Native Plants here at Beechwood Farms Nature Reserve. So if this is something that you're thinking about adding to your landscape, I highly encourage it. With these roses, you can also kind of look at the canes to help you figure out if you've got rubus or the brambles. These are blackberries and raspberries. Multiflora rose has a very green cane, and the brambles is going to be either kind of a reddish brown or even a purple with some dusting to it. The leaf structure is going to be different on these. All three will, or all, both of these will have prickles. So they're little thorn-like spines that recurve and are very painful when you get stuck in them, but they break off. So it's on the very outer edge of this plant tissue. You can pop it off on both these, but the color, that green multifloral rose, will help you identify this even from afar. For management, this is spread through both seed and root sprouts. So as the cane falls down, it can kind of root back up. This can make it form these massive thickets. If you have a small population, you can get in there and try to just pull it out. Monitor for resprouts next year, pull those out. You really do want to get the entire root system. You really do want to just kind of check these things next year. I like to put little orange flags in areas that I've pulled so that I remember to go check it that following year for resprouts. Because when they're smaller, it's a little bit easier to manage those. And mowing can set it back temporarily. This is just like with the privet. Like if you just need to get in there, like clear it out, this will set it back, but it's not going to kill it. You're gonna, again, if you're mowing a big thicket, you're probably going to want to look at following this up with some sort of treatment. The Some treatments are actually effective year round for multifloral rows. So cut stem, where you actually cut the stem and look at that base, that little stump, and you put herbicide just on the outer ring of live tissue so that it draws it down to the roots. That can be effective year round. Some of them, though, it's all about timing. So it's always important to look at these resources if you are going to choose an herbicide option. Otherwise, pulling this out and just kind of monitoring for resprouts. We're still with woody plants here, but we're on to invasive bittersweet. This is a vining plant, but it is still woody. This was introduced from Asia's in like mid 1800s again. It's very aggressive. It was an ornamental plant, but it's extremely aggressive. Its twining ability is capable of girdling trees, which we'll see on some of these other slides. Good tip for ID: if you have big thickets of vines, you probably have bittersweet. But that twining nature of them, so you can see that you got these little tendrils just exploring around looking for something, and then they start twining in with each other. The leaf shape is also very unique to me in that it's round with a little tip right here. So it's almost like you had someone blew a bubble with bubble gum and you just took the very outer edge of that bubble and stretched it out a little bit. So very round but tipped leaf with those serrate margins, alternately arranged. All that can make you idea, and this is one that from afar you can really start to pick up on it. These are very young plants or the very leading edge of the plant, but this can get very thick. So diameters can get over 10 inches. And that's when you start to really see that this is a woody vine. And the bark has these nice diamond shaped patterns on the grayish bark. But with the twining, as it's going around, it can actually be so resistant to being moved as the tree grows. The tree grows into the vine does not give, and it girdles the tree, meaning that it cuts off the ability for that tree to send nutrients up and down throughout its trunk from roots to leaves, and the tree will die from this. The vines themselves, they can reach like 60 feet in height, but they can't grow necessarily taller than whatever they're on. The flowers are something that you'll also start to notice in spring. They're very inconspicuous but clustered, so they're not necessarily attractive, but they are these big clusters that look like fuzz attached to them. And here you can really see that twining happening. In the winter time is when, or late summer into fall is when you'll start seeing those red fruits that are covered with a yellow skin. But for spring, I definitely just focus on that leaf shape. If you've got some of this growing on a tree in your backyard, best thing is to at least free the tree. And you can do that with a window cut where you go in and you're going to cut at the base of the vine. So try to weave your way back there, find the trunk of the tree, follow the vine all the way to the ground, cut there, and then cut again about as high up as you can get on that vine, creating a window. And by doing that, you kind of help make sure that the vine isn't going to just have a flowing vine to easily grab a hold of and speed its way back up to the canopy. It's very important to not pull at the existing vines after you do this cut. You can damage the tree. You can also injure yourself. If you keep pulling at this, who knows what's going to come down? And sometimes these vines have a lot of stuff associated with them. So it's better to just let the vine be. It's going to die off and it's going to just fall off naturally. So just do this window cut and let all that stuff up there die back. It will resprout. So you can, without using herbicides, take care of this problem by constantly checking for resprouts and cutting those back. Eventually, the root system will give out, but you have to keep up on it. You can also use an herbicide treatment, and essentially you do the same thing, the window cut, and what we need is to have the herbicide be delivered down to the root system, which means a foliar spray where you're spraying it on the leaves is very effective for that. However, the foliage for this vine is way up high. Uh, we don't want to spray that high up. So instead, with this window cut, you wait for the resprout to form, give it a couple months. That way, it's now grown past its like expedient stage, and then you can treat the foliage at that point. If you do it too soon, the plant's a little too focused on growing at the leading edge to try to get up higher that it's not really going to send a lot of stuff down to the roots. It's more or less taking everything from the roots. So giving it a couple months and then treating it is actually a great way to make this thing go away. Um, so that is fun. Yeah, so with the window cut, essentially, if we have a vine, I've got on this tree here. If this is your bittersweet, and for the window cut, you'd approach this tree, you'd follow this vine all the way down to the ground and see where the vine is emerging from the ground, and you're going to cut there. One of the best tools for this are like the big loppers, because that way, if you use a saw, you might inadvertently cut into the tree. We don't want that. But with those loppers, you can kind of hook it around. You're going to cut through right here at the base, and then follow the vine up as high as you can reach. So like, don't go get a step ladder, but just like 3 feet up, 4 feet up, whatever you can comfortably get back to. Cut that area too. So now we have anywhere from 3 to 6 feet of gap. So we've now removed that section, and that is the window cut. So everything above is going to just die off. It no longer has nutrients coming from the roots. It will just slowly die, slowly fall off. And then here at the base, we're going to have some resprouts forming that you could treat or just keep cutting. So window cuts on these woody vines can be very effective. And the idea is if you just cut the base of this, those resprouts are going to be able to quickly grab on to all this existing dead vine to expedite their process or their growth back up to the canopy. So it's better to remove that as quickly as you can. All right, now we're on to some herbaceous ones. We've got garlic mustard. This was brought over for food. European colonizers brought this over. This was documented as both food and medicine. This is a biennial. So the first year it exists as just a basal, or at the base, a little rosette of leaves. And then second year it bolts up, and that's when we get some flowers. Second year in early spring, we start to see these four-petaled flowers, so very similar to privet. Four-petaled white flowers forming this little cluster, and they emerge at the uppermost tip of the plant. And then start to form these seed pods called siliques. And you can see on here, we have all these siliques, and it's just going to keep flowering and keep producing, keep flowering, keep producing, and it can make a lot of these little seed pods. As summer continues, these dry out, they become brittle, and they shatter to release the seeds with a little bit of momentum to help them spread past the initial parent. The kidney bean shaped leaf can help you identify this. When crushed, it's going to have that garlicky odor to it. The one of the things you can confuse this with is definitely our violets, which will also have a bit of a kidney bean or kidney shape to them. Look for the leaf veins. If you don't want to accidentally crush one of your violets to see if it smells, look at the leaf veins. So on the violets, you have just these simple little unconnected veins, whereas on garlic mustard, it forms this little netting pattern. So nice little straight lines with the netting pattern in between versus these little bit of a curved veining to the violets. Another kidney bean shaped low growing foliage that you can see around spring is our creeping Charlie, but this is also a non-native invasive. This is one that is just like a garden weed. You pull this out. The leaves on Creeping Charlie, they're opposite to each other and they are on a stolon, which is this horizontal stem. So this is actually the stem of the plant growing on just above the ground. Roots are coming here. And at each of these nodes, we have two leaves. Whereas garlic mustard, if you were to pull it up, it's just got this J-shaped root. So it doesn't have that stolon connecting all the garlic mustards together. And Creeping Charlie won't have that odor to it. So for management, pulling this is very, very effective. It does not resprout from root fragments. Still, like, just go in after a nice rain event and you can start pulling these things out very easily. Um, you do want to pull this before those sleeks ripen because otherwise you get in there and you're just going to be shattering seeds all over, just putting seeds back in, and these seeds are going to persist in the soil for a very long time. So you do want to keep an eye out for this, but if you keep pulling at it, it will go away. It might find its way back, but you can really clear this out. You do want to bag and remove these pulled plants. So this is very important because what we're going to see is on a lot of trails, people will want to help and pull up some of the garlic mustard and then they leave them on the sidewalk or the trail because that's a good spot for the garlic mustard to die off. Unfortunately, there are enough reserves in this root system for this garlic mustard to kind of continue its life process. So if it had flowers on it, there's enough roots in here for the flowers to kind of go to seed. Those seeds are going to develop and then they can shatter and spread all over here. So just leaving the garlic mustard on the trail is not very good. It's not I mean, if the garlic mustard was just left where it was, it will do some stuff too. But now we also have the potential for people to trample on these or the seeds to shatter and spread to the trail itself. They're going to get picked up on by boots and carried to other parts of an area. So whether it's on your property or elsewhere, garlic mustard should really be disposed of by the trash. You can also find some fun ways to eat garlic mustard when the leaves are very fresh. It makes a nice little pesto alternative. If you do have stuff that's gone to seed, if you collect those seeds very carefully, you can make a mustard out of them. All right, this is one that is kind of surprising. We have a couple, two more to go through. Orange daylily. So this is not native. This is a plant from Asia, but it's also highly prized by many gardeners. It's a very versatile plant. It's a very beautiful plant. This is one that definitely inspired me to love plants. This is something that's highly cultivated as well, and the cultivated varieties are mostly sterile. So this doesn't necessarily spread through seed, but it does spread through thick tuberous roots. So this daylily, what can happen, and the reason why I bring this one up is they can form thick blankets that just mat out the entire landscape. especially in like lower areas of the watershed. This was tend to have very unique plant ecosystems that the orange daylily can completely outcompete. You can actually kind of see this in play if you go along Allegheny River Boulevard here in a couple months. You're going to see tons of orange daylily blooms. It's just a mass of these. And the way they're getting here is if you have orange daylilies, sometimes gardeners will just kind of rip up some chunks, or maybe they're getting rid of them and throw them over the hillside, or they've got a compost bin and the compost area kind of washes downhill. Those root tubers can survive that and reestablish themselves elsewhere. So this is one that can spread just because it's thrown out. The What I would just kind of think about is consider containerizing these plants, whether it's in an actual garden container or if you just have your daylilies in a planted bed that can't spread to a nearby woodland area. And just being mindful about what you're doing with the roots that you might dig up. If you're interested in getting rid of these to put in some native plants that also have the benefit of having insect associations beyond nectar, you can dig up these small patches. Just get a shovel, dig it up, look for resprouts in the next year. If you have a very large amount, you can mow over that large area and smother it with black plastic, thick black plastic, or even just cardboard and just mulch. Sometimes you can just lay mulch on top and do the sheet mulching idea. Herbicide's effective, but especially in the fall, this is something that you can manage without pretty easily, though. And this isn't one that I'm saying you have to get rid of. Like, just consider that it can get out. Ooh, I did have two more. So creeping thistle. I'm calling it that because a lot of it is better known as Canada thistle, but that's a bit of a misnomer because it makes it sound like it's from Canada. It is not. It is native to Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. However, it probably spread to those areas and it likely originated in somewhere in the Mediterranean. This is something that's plagued farmers and gardeners forever. This is just such a weedy little thing. And European settlers in America thought that French settlers in Canada were the ones that brought it over, so that's why they called it Canada thistle. So if you go outside of the US, it's known as creeping thistle. This is one that spreads by wind-blown seeds and a extensive root system. So the seeds can persist in the soil for like 20 years, and the taproot sends out these insane uh, creeping lateral roots, as well as just an extensive tap root that can really survive in some terrible soil conditions. The flowers start popping. They've got those unique little purple aster ray flowers, and the spiky leaves are irregularly lobed with these spines. Their variation on the leaf for creeping thistles kind of high. There are four non-native invasive thistles in Pennsylvania. The way these other three are biennials, creeping thistle is a perennial, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get rid of. You can tell if you have these other three because the stem is also winged on these other three. So if you notice right here, here's the leaf, and it comes in. It's almost like the leaf and the stem are merging. Creeping thistle does not have that. It's got a smooth stem. All these other three will. It is worth noting there are native thistles. There's probably about half a dozen native thistles in Pennsylvania. Some of them can be kind of rare species. The chance of these native thistles just randomly growing in your garden kind of low, but if you have a nice little meadow area in the back or a little swampy area and you see something that looks like thistle, it's got the spiny leaves, it is worth taking a closer look, especially if it's just one or two plants. These other guys, they do tend to form really thick, especially creeping thistle, forms like a thick patch. But if it's just one or two, it's worth looking in. And I will share this in the follow-up email, but Xerces Society has this awesome native thistle guide. And this has some really great resources talking about invasive thistles as well as the benefits of our native thistles. And again, this is one where if you think you have a native thistle, you can find resources like this one to help you ID it, or reach out to us and we can see what we can do for you. For management, all right, if you got Canada thistle, you got this creeping thistle, take a deep breath and just prepare. Prepare for a very long war against this. The small infestation can be smothered or pulled and mowed, but you need to do it multiple times. You have to keep up on this, like 3 times a growing season, bare minimum. This is something that you just have to be relentless about. Use it as an excuse to get outside. If you really want to get rid of it, just keep trying. And then also look around the surrounding area to see if there's Canada thistle that's nearby that's blowing seeds in. Multiple herbicide treatments are even needed if you're going to go the herbicide route. This isn't a one and done endeavor. It's multiple treatments in the late summer and fall when it's actually bringing stuff down to the roots, and you have to like alternate the herbicides. So I will share some resources on this in the follow-up, but just so you kind of have an understanding, this cutaway root section, all these roots, this is 2 years of root growth from creeping thistle based on an initial 1 foot section. So don't think there's a quick silver bullet for this, but there is an end. Creeping thistle is something you can definitely manage. You just have to keep at it. All right, last one, and I know we're almost done. I will definitely send out the follow-up video if you have to leave at 1 p.m. But silvergrass, I just wanted to mention, so this was brought over from Asia as an ornamental grass that's still widely planted today. It spreads through very vigorous rhizomes, which are underground stems, and the seeds are supposed to be sterile, but they're really not. There's definitely some that are viable, so windblown seeds can also spread this. This tends to also, just like the daylily, establish in very sensitive plant communities of floodplains and creates very thick mats and monocultures, but it's also highly flammable, increasing the risk of wildfires for those areas. This is just one that if you do, or if you're trying to get rid of it, you can actually manage it by like, it doesn't tolerate mowing. So monthly mowing during the growing season, it might take a couple years, but if you keep at it, it does not tolerate that. So it will die off from mowing. Be careful digging it out because it can kind of make things worse. But if you are very careful and make sure you get rid of everything, you can. If you want to at least just remove the seed heads, you can kind of hope that there's no windblown seeds coming here. There is the herbicide option where you're going to cut it very low in the winter, like most people do to maintain these. Wait until it regrows about a foot and then treat it. And that way it's actually going to bring it down to the roots, but you might have to repeat it the next year. Main reason I want to bring this in is just if you're looking for ornamental grasses, there are native alternatives to silvergrass. And silvergrass also includes that zebra grass. That's just a cultivated variety where you have those zebra stripes. But just so you know, things like switchgrass, where you get these nice poofy cloud-like seed heads, Indian grass, the nice tall, beautiful yellows, or big blue stem can really help fill that need for the ornamental grass in any garden. All right, so we're a little over, but I'm sure some folks are saying, well, what about this invasive that I have? Well, that's why I want to at least connect you with some of the resources, such as Penn State Extension. And Penn State will have full articles on a lot of invasive species in our area that have the actual management calendar to them, telling you when certain things are effective. So for pulling, this was garlic mustard. Pulling it in anytime from April through June is effective as long as it's that second rosette stage, or the second stage. Or this was one of the woody stems. It's talking about when 3 different herbicide treatments are effective, or things like the cut stump is effective year round. And in those articles, they'll talk about the herbicide, they'll talk about the physical management. So Penn State Extension is a very, very valuable resource for this type of stuff. Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, so DCNR, produces fact sheets on all of our invasive plant species that have a lot of information on how they got here, how you can identify them, some confusing species, why they're a problem, and then some management options. And they are pretty good about having both the manual and chemical option on each of these. Invasive.org is fun if you're just wanting to look into this a bit more. So they do have full lists of all the different invasive species. You can just start to get a little bit more information on this. And invasive.org has a lot of great photos that you can use for reference, and they talk about things beyond just the plants. And of course, you can reach out to us. We also have some updated invasive brochures that are available on our website. So these are things like going into knotweeds, or as well as what the difference between invasives and natives are, and then some great alternatives if you're looking to get rid of some of the common backyard invasives and what you could get in its place. And last but not least, I did want to mention if you want to learn some more, we do have some volunteer days with our nursery. So every Tuesday for the growing season, you can volunteer to be a native plant nursery volunteer, or on Thursdays, you can help us in our actual landscape. These are great ways to kind of learn a bit more about native plants and sometimes invasive species. These are uh, we do ask that you register, so you can find this on our website, aswp.org, just so we know how many people to expect. And